we'll get started. Today, we're going to talk about waterwise gardening, waterwise landscapes, which is so important for climate resiliency. As gardeners, we want to make sure we have the best practices that are not only benefiting our landscapes, but the environment as a whole. So today, what we'll be looking at is we'll be exploring the current conditions, and then we'll go into how we have more waterwise gardens. And so we'll go into a little bit on site assessment, right plant, right place, plant selection, and then the gardening practices and watering practices. Yeah. So first sorry, I just want to move this. First, as all of you know, I mean, I'm in Rockland, but that's not far away from Westchester, just over the bridge. And from last season, during the growing season, there was a drought. So we had to be really mindful of what water we were using in our gardens. And so we use a lot of water. As a country, we use a lot of water for our homes and for our gardens. So it's really important to be aware of this and different things that we can do to kind of be more efficient in our watering practices. And because water is such a precious resource, and we want to make sure that we are not overusing it. Not only to, overusing it can be not beneficial for our gardens as well. So we want to be really mindful of how we are using this precious resource. And the EPA has a great site that I include in the resources that is all on how to save water for homeowners and for not only indoors, but for gardens. And it has a really, extensive resources on how you can go about that. So so we use estimated nearly 9 billion gallons of water for outdoor usage each year. So that's quite a lot. So we want to try and reduce the amount of water that we're using in our gardens. And this is a chart from Rockland, and actually a little bit old, as you can see, from 2005. But so it's just probably increased because our population has increased. There's a lot more development since 2005, and in recent years, a lot more people moving in. And so, but yeah, you can see that the residential use of water is very, very high. So if there are ways that we can reduce that, that is, the goal. Right. So impervious surfaces, when we are in these suburban landscapes, such as Westchester and Rockland, there are, we create a lot of impervious surfaces. So a lot of surfaces where the water, if we do have rainfall, which has been, declining somewhat, especially last year. So, we didn't have much snowfall. So, the amount of water that rainfall that's happening and the amount of snow, we want to make sure that we can absorb that as much as possible. This is from Rockland, but you can see all the brown here is all impervious surfaces, that it cannot absorb that much water. So, things like parking lots, asphalt, concrete, all these things that we use in our construction, that are, roadways that, we need in our modern life, but they take away from the absorption of, rainwater. So the water just runs off and it's not able to be absorbed. Also, it can be kind of, then also create other challenges for stormwater runoff and, in our waterways. So we definitely want to, as, gardeners and homeowners, with our landscape, our individual landscapes, there are things we can do to help to absorb that water in the places that we are. So suburban landscapes, sometimes tend to be not the best in absorbing, creating these landscapes that absorb water. We kind of have we have driveways that, are impervious, that don't absorb the water. We have, tend to want front lawns and back lawns, and, and usually, in the past haven't been, the best landscapes that will actually take in the rainfall. And that actually aren't the best for climate resiliency if we have drought-like conditions in the past. So, so you can see here this, with the lawn and then some container plantings. I have no idea where this is. And so just so you know, I always feel bad having a photo up that's kind of like, all right, we want to move away from this. They do have some plantings here so that can absorb some of the water, but yeah, we want to create landscapes that can definitely, take in the rainwater, and really they can be quite beautiful and enjoyable for us, and then also for, the wildlife around us. So this is another example of a, suburban landscape. Obviously, there's a lot more green, and you see the trees and the shrubs, so they can take in some. But then there's a lot of lawn, which is okay. But you can tell that this would need, if there were drought, it would definitely need watering. So there's, I would say that we can move into better practices into creating landscapes that don't require as much watering. So here's another example of a suburban landscape. This is somewhat of a rain garden. It's right at the edge of, the sidewalk or the runoff, and not sidewalk, but to the street. And you can see that they have put a lot of plantings there. They have, some native plantings, and it's right at the edge, so that, and it's probably on a little bit of a slope, so that's absorbing all that water that normally would just run off into the street and go into our gutters or into the water, systems. And sometimes that's very taxing on our water system. So this might be a little more, wild and unkept, but would be very beneficial. So, we want to start, shifting our, aesthetic, choices, if, to a little less, manicured and a little bit more, natural, in ways that will benefit, absorbing this natural resource and preventing runoff. And then also this would have so much more benefit for, beneficial insects and birds and all the wildlife that we want to be supporting. So one of the ways that we can do this when we're thinking about our personal sites is site assessment, which, as gardeners, I'm sure this is something you are very familiar with. You want to be thinking about, because even though, you in Westchester are, have a certain site, there's so many different types of, landscapes within just, that location. So you want to be thinking about your location, how, your garden is positioned, on your site. And, there's all different kinds of factors in, when you're considering how you're going to set up your landscape. So, maybe there's large trees that are going to affect, shade and coverage. Maybe there's a big slope, so you want to take advantage of that for absorbing the water, rain. And maybe you have a moist area, maybe you have a dry, sunny area. So those are all things you want to consider. Also wind. So, all these things when you're looking at your landscapes are, when you're thinking out, you want to be very thoughtful about what you're putting into your garden and how it's going to not only affect your landscape for you, how you live in it, but also for the environment as a whole, for the ecosystem. And then hardiness zone, we're all very familiar with hardiness zone, and, depending on like how cold, a plant can withstand. And, so, but the thing with hardiness zone, it's important to know the hardiness zone of plants you're putting in, but also, you could have a plant that is from a totally different area that has the same hardiness zone. So it really, you want to be very familiar with like your specific, area, your, like the native plants that are from your, from New York or, but, semi-local, to incorporate some of those. And also there's, microclimates in all of our landscapes. One of my favorite stories is from Brooklyn Botanic Gardens for microclimates. There was a rosemary bush that would survive in their herb garden over the winter. And it was like huge and beautiful, looked like it was from the West Coast, from California. And they couldn't figure out why it was surviving like that. And there was a microclimate because it was in Brooklyn, and underneath the rosemary bush was the subway. So the subway was heating it all winter long. So it was even though the rosemary normally wouldn't survive there because the hardiness, but it actually was its own specific microclimate. So we're not going to have that in Westchester or Rockland, but there are certain, microclimates within all of our landscapes. So maybe you have if you're on, like a hilltop, you'll have different microclimates. So even within one landscape, you can have all these different, microclimates. And just the conditions, maybe you have really dry soil, maybe you have really, maybe a dry area, maybe it's compacted, maybe there's construction there, so you want to be really, paying attention to the different conditions of your landscapes. And then, of course, how you use the space. So, you don't, of course, lawn can be, is great for being able to, for kids to play on and to be, we use it in different ways, so if we can reduce some of the lawn so that we don't have to use as much water, but, of course, if we have some that, is, where kids are going to be playing or we're going to be using it in different ways. So, so you want to think about how you use the space. And, that's always important when we're planning our gardens, and to put into practice, these different, waterwise gardening, and how we can put different plants in, certain areas. Like right up front here, you're not going to be, running up there or laying your blanket out there, so here you can put in gardens, to this front area that's right on the street to absorb rainwater, and also to look beautiful for your home. So this is also from the EPA guidelines on waterwise landscaping, and it's showing you kind of what I was talking about with that, different plants for different areas. So it kind of breaks it up into the different regions. So it's not just the hardiness zone, but also your different regions and your different microclimates. So I provide this in your resources, and, you would enter your, zip code, and it'll help you find plants that are drought tolerant and and also native for your zone or for your zip code. And this, I think, is a great example of, kind of limiting a lawn and adding more flowers and plants. And, this is going to be able to absorb that rainwater and also provide so much benefit for, birds and insects and, all the pollinators that we want to support. And also is just very lovely. So they kept a little pathway that can be mowed of lawn, but really planted so many natives into their landscape, and is a lovely example to show how you can reduce your lawn and still have this, kind of low maintenance. I know it for some people might look like it's high maintenance, but really this can be very low maintenance, and also would provide some winter interest when, when the leaves have fallen off the trees and everything, then a lot of these, plants some will die back, or will, will die back a little bit, but then you have the echinacea and different plants that will have such lovely winter interest in some of the grasses. So I think this is a really lovely example. And so one thing I wanted to go into is looking at native plants. This is a little image chart done by one of the master gardeners I work with that is just a wealth of knowledge and really passionate about native plants. And the reason I want to go into native plants is because native plants are, will be the most beneficial for our ecosystems and for our landscapes. And also native plants, if we are choosing the right native plants for our, landscapes, they are going to be the most climate resilient. So if we have different native plants that are well established, we won't have to use water. Once they're established, you can just, for the most part, let them be. I mean, if we're having extreme drought, there might be some that that it could be more challenging, but for the most part, and we'll look at native plants that are drought tolerant. So, and if they are, this is their ecosystem, so they are going to benefit us the most incorporating these into our gardens. So we'll just go through some native plants I chose that are drought tolerant that we can work into our gardens, but there are so many more too. The ones we're going to be looking at are more for our direct region. So another important thing is, when we're choosing our plants for our gardens, is to be thinking about the spring, the summer, and the fall. So to have flowers all throughout the seasons and to have, them be continuous. So this is not only beneficial for, of course, the birds and the bees and the pollinators that we want to invite into our gardens, but it's also important, I mean, one, for us to enjoy our gardens, but also because if we just have plants that, that then are kind of, dying back, or the foliage is like not there, and like you want to have more coverage and more root systems like going deep to absorb the rainwater. And so yeah, I do believe it's really important to be thinking about the continuation of the garden, like how it's going to be functioning throughout every season. And I would say even in the winter to be thinking about that as well. So. But one thing, native plants are fantastic, as we all know, and really important to incorporate into our gardens, but also not all native plants are going to be drought tolerant. So you also want to match your conditions. So certain, plants really do require moist, wet soil. And if you have an area in your garden that's like that, perfect. And you could incorporate both of these plants into your gardens. But if you have a dry, sunny garden and you're like, well, it's a native plant, so I'm just going to put that into the garden and it's going to do well. Well, it's not, unfortunately, because some, these two native plants require moist, wet soil. So you really want to be mindful of where you're putting plants. I would say cardinal flower, Lobelia cardinalis, is one of the ones that I hear the most of. I think it's it's very beautiful. It attracts hummingbirds. We all love hummingbirds. So you hear of so many people putting this flower into their gardens and not surviving because they just don't have the right conditions. It really wants that, wet, moist soil. So you do also want to pay attention to that. It's not every native plant is going to fit just perfectly into every garden. So you want to make sure you're being mindful of that as well. So now we'll look at some specific native plants that I chose that would be great to incorporate into our gardens, that for one, to strengthen the soils, and then also for drought tolerance and climate resiliency. So I just love this picture. This is Baptisia and a river birch together. So it must be a little bit, more moist condition there. And those are two native plants that I just think this is such a beautiful combination. So you can be thinking about different, different plant combinations, that will work together not only in conditions, but aesthetically. And I just think this is really fantastic combination. And they, if this is like a, more moist area, both of these are going to really absorb that and take in the rainwater nicely, and also just look fantastic in the garden. So these are the individual native plants. So Baptisia false indigo is a kind of a shrub-like native plant that you do want to be mindful of where you're putting it, because it does have a taproot. So it's very difficult to move once you do put it in, but it is very resilient and it's drought tolerant and can take some, poor soils. Like, let's say you have an area that has been compacted over the years and is just like not the best soil conditions. This, once it gets established, can really, thrive. So, but yeah, this would be a great plant to put into your gardens, and is an early bloomer. So this could be an early spring one. And again, it would be drought tolerant. So it would be climate resilient. We wouldn't have to water it, after it had been established. The thing with all of these plants, though, if you're putting in new plants, you do need to water them when the first year or so, just to make sure that their roots are getting watered and are establishing. So we'll go into that a little bit more towards the end of the presentation. So also goldenrod, this is a late bloomer, definitely drought tolerant, and this will reseed. So if you haven't, but can be easily controlled. But if you have an area that is like sunny and dry, and you just kind of want a low maintenance, lovely late season flower, this is a fantastic plant that I'm sure we're all familiar with. And then Joe Pye weed. This has a long bloom period. It is very drought tolerant, and, also all of these are fantastic for, the native birds and pollinators. But it also, again, can be great. This can also be incorporated into rain gardens. So, because this can take average to wet. So, you just want to make sure when you're thinking about your site where this would fit best and where the other plants would fit best. And then you would put them together in your different sites. So this is a liatris, which is just such a lovely flower, and add such color and beauty to our gardens. And this one can handle, average soils. It can handle a little bit to the drier side, is definitely drought tolerant, but can also handle if it's a little bit more moist, but you don't want wet conditions. And, this is, would be lovely added into our gardens. Sorry, my little clicker, I keep losing it. And then New York ironweed, Veronia, and this is also late season, and this would be average to wet. So maybe you would put it closer to like where you're putting the Joe Pye weed. So you would want to be thinking about the different planting communities that you're putting together, but also can withstand drought. So a lot of these, that's why we are looking at them today. And this one, of course, the opuntia, the prickly pear cactus that is native to our region, and I used to live right below the Hudson Highlands, and we'll walk up there, all the time. And in the summer, there's all these opuntia all along the highlands, and it was very beautiful. So I feel like it's one of the plants that when you learn, that's native, kind of blows people's minds. So, but this is native. It is spiky. It is a cactus. So you want to be careful that you have an area that's not going, if you have, young children aren't going to be, running around by it. So, but it is definitely drought tolerant, does not like too much moisture, as you can see on the right. If there's been a lot of rains and you have an area that's going to, hold that water, you want to be really mindful of that because it's not going to enjoy all that water. And Golden Alexander is a lovely early season. In May and June it's flowering. It's just really attractive foliage in the spring, and really beneficial for insects and butterflies. And even though it's average to wet, if there's drought later in the season, it will, once it's established, maybe the leaf foliage might die back that season, but it will come back, So some of the things, like when it is drought tolerant, some of the plants that we're looking at will, kind of stay, maybe their foliage will, kind of struggle through the drought, but they should be able to bounce back once the conditions, kind of get regulated somewhat. And then grasses, of course, grasses are very drought tolerant. So they're an excellent, plant to incorporate into our gardens. They are very low maintenance. They also provide a lot of winter interest. And, they also, architecture and the different ways they move in our landscapes is so lovely. So I highly recommend incorporating a lot of the grasses into our, into our plantings. So this one is a switchgrass, a Panicum virgatum. So, but there are lots of different grasses that are fantastic in our landscapes. So, and then we'll look at some shrubs. I don't have a picture of one, but little blue stem is such a fantastic plant or grass to put into our gardens. And in the resource page, I gave you just a whole list, more than what we're looking through quickly, but a whole list of different native plants and grasses and their bloom times, their conditions, all their information that are, native. Not only, some are native to New York and some are more regional, that you can look up and see how they would work in your, landscapes. So that now we'll look at different shrubs that you can incorporate. And so Potentia, they renamed it, I think, but then maybe there's debate on that. But it's always silly when they I understand why they would rename them, but it makes it challenging for us when we're sharing plant names. So, but yeah, Potentia, very, very, very drought tolerant, and can also kind of resilient to other conditions. So very climate resilient. If we're having extreme rains or if we're having drought, it's very, very hardy. Because that's another thing to think about. Even, I think drought is something that we think about quite a bit, especially with recent conditions, with, the limited snowfall that we received this past year, and then also the late season drought last year. But also if there are, excessive rains, that can be another thing that we want to be having these plants in our gardens. There's not just runoff, that the plants are absorbing the, rain. This is a great plant for buttonbush for if you have a wet area, sometimes maybe if you've been, near ponds or different, areas like that, you'll see buttonbush, and it's a fantastic shrub for incorporating your garden into a more wet area. And then Clethra alnifolia is such a lovely shrub to put into your garden as well. A lot of these have really lovely, a lot of the native plants have really lovely fall foliage as well. So not only are they, creating these water-wise landscapes for us and absorbing the rainwater, surviving through drought, but then also providing such beauty for our gardens. So, and also this one's fantastic for the pollinators as well, and smells fantastic too. And then if you have kind of a woodland area to your landscape, Lindera is fantastic to put in there, and really beneficial, food source for native butterflies. And yeah, so this could, and it's usually a little bit more wet area in the woodland setting. So, because you want to be thinking about your whole landscape. So we're all going to have very different gardens, very different, environments, but some of us might have, smaller spaces, some larger. But if you do have any type of woodland setting, I think it's important to, maybe it's already full of native plants and, then you can just let it be. But if maybe it's not, and you want to incorporate more, natives and plants into it, maybe it's been cleared for development or cleared for some reason, and you want to make sure you're putting, plants into the environment that are going to benefit the ecosystem and, absorb it, the precious rainwater that we do get. And then, sorry, I'm just going to take a quick sip of water. So bayberry, also renamed America Pennsylvanica, that's what I always think of it as. But so bayberry is a fantastic shrub. This one is very climate resilient. It also can withstand like salt, like if you have it by roadways, if it gets sprayed with salt, it can handle that. Excuse me. And can handle drought. And again, maybe it won't look its, most lovely at, if there's an extreme drought, but we'll almost 100% be able to bounce back. So once these are established, again, they will, you will not have to water them. You will not have to be using your watering systems to, add water into them. They will just be, able to withstand on their own. And then Amelanchier, Canadensis, serviceberry, or Chablot. Unfortunately, this is a terrible photo, I'm sorry, but I hope everybody is familiar with this, small tree. Is really lovely and can, it's somewhat of an understory tree, so it can take some part shade, and it is just a really lovely flowering tree, native tree that we can incorporate into our gardens. So it's important to have not only, smaller perennials and, but also to think about all the different, variations in plantings that we can put in, from, trees to, smaller ground covers. So it's important to be considering, the different plants that we can add into our gardens. And another small native tree is Cercis canadensis, redbud, which is so, just such a beautiful pop of color in the spring, and is actually in the pea family. And you can eat those little purple flowers, the little red buds, and they taste kind of like a pea. So they're really lovely. And this is a great small tree also to incorporate into our gardens. And then we'll end with the Cercis canadensis for the native plants for today. And it is also, even though, putting more native plants into our, landscapes is so important, also, the annual flower mixes, like cosmos and zinnias and different things are, bachelor's button are fantastic to put into our gardens as well. And the thing is, they can absorb, their roots are going to go down, even though it's temporary. They're going to provide a lot of beauty and good for the bees, and add a lot of joy into our gardens. And they're great if you have little areas that you're like, oh, I don't want to fit in like a perennial in there, or I don't have, have that much room. It's a kind of a sunny spot, but instead, you can put in annual flower mixes into those areas. So, it's, of course, we want to use all these natives, but, realistically, we're going to be using some non-natives in our garden as well. And as long as they're not invasive, that's great. So, lamb's ear is also very, very drought tolerant. And once it's established, is just very hardy and climate resilient in our gardens. Not a native, but does really well in our landscapes. And also one thing I'm sure in Rockland, we have to think about this all the time. I'm sure in Westchester is the same with deer tolerance. So these are deer tolerant. So, you know, that's something that we always have to be thinking about. If we don't have a fenced area, you know, then, you know, we want to put all these plants into our garden that, you know, are going to be absorbing the rainwater. But if they're just getting demolished by deer, then that's not good either, and can be, you know, really frustrating, and also financially really frustrating too. So you just spend all this money putting in these plants, and then if they're not deer tolerant, you know, then it doesn't really matter if they're drought tolerant, because the deer are going to come and eat them. So, so yeah, so lamb's ear is very drought tolerant. Also good, you know, ground cover you can see. So that's one thing, you don't want to be having just bare soil, you know, so a little bit of bare soil is good for some of the bees, but and the beneficial insects, but not much. So for the most part, you want to be either mulching or having some type of plant coverage in your landscapes. And then another non-native that we all love so dearly is lavender. And lavender can be very drought tolerant, and does fantastic. And also, you know, the bees love it. So it's great to, you know, this could be one of the non-natives that you put into a dry, sunny area, and also, again, deer tolerant. So that's one of the reasons that, you know, if you have a really dry, sunny area and you want, you know, to put it in, it's definitely going to be very climate resilient. So yeah, so now I just want to talk a little bit about our individual spaces and how we use them, and to look at your site in ways that, you know, oh, maybe this is an area there, you know, the water runs down. Maybe it's a lawn area. I'm not really interested in, I don't need lawn there, is what you're thinking. And what else can I do there? Could I put, you know, maybe you want to put some perennials, maybe, you know, different ways you want to think about it. Well, this is an example from one of my the master gardeners that I work with. And she had wanted, you know, she didn't have a fenced in garden, and she had been trying to grow vegetables forever and trying to get the deer to not eat them. And that was a losing battle. So she built this, you know, kind of fenced in, this fenced in raised bed vegetable garden. And it really made great use of the space. And she does have to water it. I mean, that is one thing with vegetable gardens that we do have to supplement watering. You know, usually rainfall is not going to cut it for vegetable gardens, but this area does absorb some of the rainwater. So, but, you know, like for the marigolds on the outside, she never waters those. It's really just the beds inside. And we'll talk a little bit about different ways for, you know, vegetable gardens that you can address watering so that it's not being too wasteful. But I thought this was a great use of, you know, looking at your landscape and being like, oh, this area is not working. How can I use it better? And then also, this is example of a rain garden type area that, you know, this was all lawn. And then they put in, you know, these different plugs that will get, you know, bigger over time, but to take out some of the lawn that was underneath the trees and have different water that can really help hold the water and the runoff here. So these are new plantings. So when they're new, you would be watering them. I can't act, this is from the EPA site, which I'm not sure what this is. I think it's just a tripod, but it kind of looks like water here, which this is not a good watering practice if that's from what it is. So I can't exactly tell, but yeah, you definitely will go into it a little bit more, but you want to be watering the soil, not the air. So, and the top of leaves. So, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. But this is, besides that strange watering setup, if that is what that is, I think this is a good example. If you have some trees that you can incorporate some ground cover, you know, plantings into underneath to absorb any runoff that would be happening in your landscapes. And this is from another master gardener showing different edging that you can do, because if you don't want to take up all of your lawn, but that you can, you may edge the sides of the fence or around your house and put in different, plantings that are going to be absorbing any runoff, that is happening. And you can tell that, the first year it's maybe going to be, as gardeners, we have to be patient. And so the first year, maybe it's going to be a little bit smaller. And as the years go along, it's going to grow in and fill in. I think they pop some, some annuals into here too. But for the most part, it's going to fill in, and you won't, then it'll establish and you won't have to continue to water it. It also is going, the roots are going to go deeper than the grass that's beside it, and it will, really be more beneficial for, catching rainwater and being low maintenance for, and adding beauty into your home landscapes. So watering practices. So you do want to water early in the day. I mean, the recommendation that we have on our resource on our fact sheet that I shared with you says 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. I would say probably most of us are not going to get up at 4 and water. I mean, you could have different, but you can do, if you have a drip irrigation system, the technology on those has gotten fantastic. So you can time them. So you could have it earlier in the morning if it's going to be if it's in August and it's a very hot day, and, it's been kind of drought-like conditions, super hot. You could do it earlier, so you would want to time it to be closer to 4 a.m. Instead of later in the day. And the reason for that is once the sun starts really getting hot, it's, the water, the evaporation is going to start happening. So you want to water earlier. So most likely that would be with a timer on a irrigation system. But yeah, so we want to also think about established plants. If you put some new plants into your gardens this year, you want to be able to water them this year, but then hopefully next year, after the winter and their dormancy and then coming back, they hopefully will be able to, limit the water more and more till the point where you don't have to water them at all. And again, you want to water the base of plants, not the air or the leaves. So, if you are watering by hand, you want to make sure you're watering the base and not the leaves, and that's not just evaporating into the air. So if you are hand watering, you want to try and do that before the heat of the day for sure. Oh, and also, sorry, one thing I wanted to talk about too is that, sometimes people are like, will ask, well, oh, if I can water early in the morning, maybe I can water late at night. So there are problems with that because it can create fungus, fungal issues. Because if you're watering in the evening and then it gets colder, and let's say it's on the leaves, it can cause some fungal issues. So you do want to water early in the day. It's just really the most beneficial and the most efficient. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to when you're watering. And also when you're watering, you want to, so when these plants are establishing, like if you, let's say you put in a bunch of new native perennials and shrubs and trees, and you do have to water them the first year, you want to make sure you're giving them a long water. So you want to go like long and kind of slow, like make sure this water is really going down to the roots, and that the soil is really getting, you're really, making sure that it's getting absorbed. Instead of if you just watered briefly, go out there and just, spray for a little bit, the chance of that getting down to the roots is so slim. So you want to make sure that you're watering sufficiently. So you're really watering them in, so the roots can go deep and get absorbed. That's going to be the most beneficial in the long run. You're not going to be wasting water because you won't have to water as frequently. So you want to make sure that you're really doing proper watering practices. It's going to benefit the plant and also, reduce the amount of water that you're going to, for the long run, that you're going to have to be using. So mulches are fantastic as well. Ground covers are great and mulches. So you can use wood chips, like this is in our demonstration garden, or leaves, and compost is great. Compost is also very important to be putting into our gardens because it's so beneficial and it helps with the soil structure, so that the plants, the soil can absorb the water. So the soil, it's really been, so important to be continuously putting in compost into our soils. And so that's something that we want to consider as well. And at CC in Rockland, for our vegetable gardens, we kind of just top dress with compost. So that can be also a really fantastic practice. And as it's, getting watered in and breaking down, then it's benefiting the soil and the plants. And it's just, and limiting the evaporation of water into the air. And then rain barrels. So this is at Extension in Rockland. So we have several rain barrels set up. One of the master gardeners I work with, he's actually an expert on lawns. He has 7 rain barrels on his property. So, that's the rain barrels are going to be harvesting the rainwater off of our rooftops. And then we can use that rainwater in our garden. So limit the, municipal water, and watering from hoses or irrigation systems that we would be using. A lot of times for these, we use it for our container gardens. And one thing that people have asked in the past is if it's safe to use in vegetable gardens. I think that depends on your environment, kind of. There have been some studies on it, but for example, at my home, I don't use my rain barrel water in my vegetable garden, only because I have kind of that asphalt tile and some of that sediment gets into the rain barrel because it's coming off the roof. So I don't personally use it in there. I haven't had it tested, but I just use it in other container gardens that I have, and for flowers and things like that. And last year, it did run out when there was a drought. I'm adding another rain barrel this year, so they are really helpful. And also prevents like that runoff that can cause damaging effects in our landscapes. So lawns, I know I'm running a little short on time. So lawns, I am not an expert on lawns, but of course I understand that how we can use them in our landscapes, and they can be really great for recreational areas and for young children and kids like to play on and do sports activities. But they do require water. Like last year with the drought, if you have had a lawn and you weren't watering it, it definitely went dormant. It definitely was brown. And so, and sometimes people don't, they don't want a big brown patch, they want to then water it, which, last year with the drought, we don't want to be using our resources in that way. So I am from the camp to advocate for reducing lawns as much as you can, but I also do understand that they are really beneficial. But one thing, so a lot of you want to make sure to mow them at a higher length, so have your mowing setting at a higher length so it shades out some, the water won't evaporate as fast. And also if you do have to water them, if you want to water them deeply so the roots go down a little bit more, are not deep rooted plants, but so that goes down a little bit more. And then also you can diversify your lawn and putting in different plants that don't require as much water. So I have some great images that, oh, sorry, I'll show you in a sec. So this is, so lawns also can be problematic with stormwater runoff. They can't absorb heavy rain. So, that's kind of the conditions we've been having in recent years. So lawns are not super climate resilient. So if we have heavy rains, they can absorb it and there tends to be runoff. And we want to be careful and mindful of that because the runoff can be really negative effects into our, water systems. So if we, you can put in rain gardens and have different ways to mitigate that. So also, if you diversify the plantings in lawns, one, they'll be more climate resilient. And also it looks beautiful and it's better for the insects, and it's still an area that can be mowed and still an area that can be played on. So these are both, this is to the right, I just love this one, is a bee lawn, and this is from our beloved Amy album, and she had incorporated ajuga and violets into her garden, into the lawn, and that, they thrive there and, benefit, the pollinators. And then also, don't require as much water as just a typical fescue lawn. And then clover, this image on the left shows clover in a garden, in a lawn, sorry. And that's going to also, the roots are going to be a little deeper and they're not going to require as much watering. So diversifying the plantings in there can be really great too. So also for that stormwater runoff, instead of just having lawn, when you can put in rain gardens. And I do have some in the resource pages, there's some fact sheets on rain gardens, how to start them and how to choose your sites. So these are from the EPA website. And these are two examples of rain gardens, one in a more commercial setting. And this is just so lovely, and also you get, the benefit, instead of the water just running straight off there. And this would, once established, never have to be watered and just would absorb that rainwater runoff and then could handle the drought if there were one. And just really is a lovely, example. And also here is a residential one where they did the same thing. So, I'm sure prior to this, the water would just run straight into the street and, then go into our waterways. And, so we want to be limiting that waste of water. And also our stormwater drains and, a lot of things get in there. And then if there's excessive nitrogen, can be really negative effects into our stormwater systems. So this is an example from Cornell Lawn and Turf showing homeowners' lawn care and water quality. So you see here, this, sprinkler is watering, and then maybe if it's not, a lot of times with sprinklers, you want to make sure it's not watering just one area. So that's, being spread out. And you can see this water is just here pooling up and then running into the storm drain. Here, the grass is, being mowed too close, not being, and is just going into the storm drain, which provides a lot of excessive nitrogen, which can have like really negative effects. Here, the water is being, put, right in, all of this is going just into the storm drain. So you want to be mindful of your gardening practices, how you're caring for your lawn, how you're caring for your landscapes, and how it's not only affecting your landscape, but, the environment as a whole. So yeah, so I think I'm right on time. So yeah, the message is really just to take care of our ecosystems and create water-wise landscapes with our gardening practices. And, that doesn't mean it doesn't have to be beautiful. In my, viewpoint, it would be even more beautiful to put more native plants, more climate resilient plantings into our environments and benefits. I know, I'm sure everyone has said, like, why do I have a bunny here? But, we do have native rabbits, and I know we don't want them eating our gardens, but sometimes, we have to, we do want to support the whole ecosystem and be mindful of, everything that benefits from our gardens. So, all right. And I have the resources. Here are some of the resources, but again, I shared with Amy a whole list of resources that she will share with you, and also has a planting list for native plants as well.